The hearing we have scheduled for this morning. And we are going to talk about this morning reviewing implementation of the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act and future opportunities for U.S.-Taiwan cooperation. I will make a few opening remarks. I'll yield to Senator Shaheen to do likewise, and then we will have we have three very good witnesses here today to talk about this. I'll introduce them, give them a few minutes to speak, and then you'll open it up for a round of questions. So with that, thank you to our witnesses for being here today. As you all know, Taiwan is under constant threat from China, and its fate has critical implications for the United States and for the world. The Chinese Communist Party has never controlled the territory of Taiwan, but for decades, China has waged psychological war against Taiwan, carried out endless propaganda and cyber attack campaigns to weaken its resilience, and repeatedly undermine the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. In the last year, China's land, sea, air, and rocket forces have carried out increasingly sophisticated military exercises, simulating a blockade and a quarantine of Taiwan. China is also increasing its transnational repression of Taiwanese citizens, efforts to legitimize its false claims, and bullying of other countries to support its position on Taiwan. We all know for Xi Jinping, asserting China's control over Taiwan is a legacy-defining issue. His population is aging. His economy is faltering. China needs a victory, and Xi has set his sights on Taiwan. This is deeply troubling. Taiwan is a vibrant democracy and key U.S. partner in the Indo-Pacific, but it is also our seventh largest trading partner and a rapidly growing source of investment in the United States. Idaho, my home state, knows well Taiwan's importance. It is my state's second largest international trading partner. And just last year, we celebrated 40 years of a sister relationship between Idaho and Taiwan. Taiwan is also deeply integrated in the global economy. President Trump is working to boost domestic production of semiconductors. Taiwan plays a key role in that ambition and will remain an important partner for producing the chips that control everything from U.S. missiles to washing machines. Make no mistake, China is the greatest long-term threat to American interest. If we allow China blatant aggression against Taiwan to go unchecked, that will have ripple effects on our Indo-Pacific alliances and seriously hurt our ability to compete with China globally. Look no further than the dispute China is having now with Japan. We have also recently seen China weaponize its dominance of critical supply chains, which is achieved through decades of industrial espionage and unfair trade practices. It has attempted to hold American industries hostage amid the trade talks that are going on with the United States. Taiwan may be at the forefront of China's growing aggression, but it won't be the last stop. That's why we all need to work to counter China's aggression in Taiwan. With that, I'll recognize the ranking member.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses today. Thank you all for being here. Over many decades, across many administrations, Republican and Democratic alike, the U.S. has had a strong and enduring relationship with Taiwan. But today, as we meet, we have a worrying backdrop. The Trump administration has been too willing to trade national security for short-term gains. That's a mindset that weakens our deterrence and undermines our allies. Taiwan has become an essential partner whose technological and economic cooperation is central to American life. This hearing comes at a critical moment for that relationship. Taiwan is one of the epicenters of the highly specialized semiconductor industry. It builds the advanced chips that power AI, defense technologies, and clean energy systems. However, Taiwan is more than a semiconductor superpower. One study by the Rhodium Group found that a Chinese blockade of Taiwan could lead to a $2 trillion global disruption of supply chains. And that's just a blockade. According to Bloomberg Economics, the damage from an invasion could reach 10 trillion with a T dollars, roughly 10% of global GDP. So I hope that our witnesses today can help clarify what's at stake for the United States and how China is working to undermine Taiwan. There is strong bipartisan support in this committee and throughout Congress across the national security community for Taiwan. We recently passed out of committee legislation on Taiwan from Senator Risch and myself, including deploying U.S. teams to map and target PRC sanctions pressure points to deter Chinese aggression. But we need to do more. We need to strengthen economic tools to deny Beijing the revenue and technology to wage war. We need to do more in the information space, where Beijing has put particular focus. And we also need to support American allies, from closer defense coordination with Japan and South Korea to demonstrating a united front with our allies on sanctions and export controls. As Dartmouth's Professor Stephen Brooks notes, have to quote Dartmouth professor since Dartmouth is in New Hampshire. Just point that out. Just pointing that out. He says, coordinated sanctions with our allies give us real leverage, credible economic pressure that strengthens deterrence in the Taiwan Strait. When we act alone, chasing bilateral trade deals, we sideline that leverage, and that weakness doesn't go unnoticed. Xi Jinping is watching how the United States responds to Russian aggression in Ukraine. Nothing could be a better deterrent to an invasion of Taiwan than defeating Putin in Ukraine and showing the world that America stands by our democratic allies. But deterrence also depends on the choices we make here at home. Delaying arms sales as the U.S. works on a trade deal with China, denying the president of Taiwan the ability to transit through the United States, or imposing tariffs against Taiwan just doesn't help. As our SFRC report, The Price of Retreat, made clear, Beijing is seizing the advantage as the United States undermines its own tools to compete. With President Trump planning a visit to Beijing next year and negotiations heating up between China and the U.S., I hope today's hearing will help clarify what this moment demands from us at home and what it will take to safeguard the United States-Taiwan relationship in the months ahead. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. Thank you all again for being here.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. We have three distinguished witnesses with us today. Dr. Lauren Dickey is an expert on Taiwan defense issues and Chinese strategy toward Taiwan. She previously served as the senior advisor and acting director for Taiwan policy in the Department of Defense and was a research scientist at the Center for Naval Analysis focused on Chinese military issues. Ms. Bonnie Glaser is managing director of the German Marshall Fund's Indo-Pacific program. She has worked at the intersection of Asia-Pacific geopolitics and U.S. policy for more than 3 decades. Bonnie has published widely in academic and policy journals and consulted for various U.S. agencies, including the Departments of Defense and State. Dr. Rush Doshi is the CV Star Senior Fellow for Asia Studies and Director for the China Strategy Initiative at the Council on Foreign Relations. He is also an assistant professor in Security Studies program at Georgetown's Walsh School of Foreign Service. So we'll start with you, Dr. Dickey. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the implementation of the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act and future opportunities for U.S.-Taiwan cooperation. For more than 45 years, support for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait has been one of America's most consistent bipartisan commitments. And the reason is straightforward. Taiwan's security is central to U.S. national security. It affects our economic strength, our military readiness, and our strategic credibility in the Indo-Pacific. Taiwan matters to the United States because it is a thriving democracy under pressure, a critical link in the Indo-Pacific security architecture, and the center of the world's most advanced semiconductor supply chain. A crisis in the Taiwan Strait would directly harm U.S. economic security, disrupt defense production, and raise costs for American families. Congress recognized these stakes when it passed TARA. Together with the Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative, TARA provides the most comprehensive authorities we have ever had to strengthen deterrence. But the effectiveness of these authorities now depends on their urgent and full implementation, along with some adjustments to modernize further how the U.S. operationalizes its Taiwan policy. 4 key areas for improvement stand out. First, Presidential Drawdown Authority has not delivered capability at the scale or speed the situation requires. Concerns about industrial backfill initially slowed execution. Today, Taiwan still lacks sufficient numbers of asymmetric systems, and that shortfall increases risk to U.S. forces should deterrence fail. Second, although TARA authorized a regional contingency stockpile, to the best of my knowledge, DoD has yet to fully realize this authority. No facilities have been built and no material has been forward positioned. Without pre-positioned munitions and sustainment, the United States and our allies would begin any crisis from a position of delay. Third, foreign military sales to Taiwan remain too slow. Industrial bottlenecks and bureaucratic complexity routinely push critical programs behind schedule or over budget. These delays weaken confidence in U.S. commitments, complicate Taiwan's defense planning, and again, increase the risk to U.S. forces in a crisis. Fourth, states' authorities that were delegated under the Taiwan Relations Act in an executive order from President Bill Clinton have been unchanged since 1996. In other words, they no longer match the tempo of today's relationship and slow down other bureaus and agencies from engaging with Taiwan. And the American Institute in Taiwan, which manages one of the most consequential portfolios of any U.S. mission, faces staffing and facility constraints that limit its ability to support an ever-expanding security agenda. To address these challenges, I'll quickly offer 6 recommendations that are detailed further in my written testimony. First, fully resource all Taiwan-relevant security assistance authorities and link them to a multi-year DoD plan with quarterly reporting on the status of how each authority is being used. Second, accelerate arms sales deliveries by establishing a fast lane list of pre-approved platforms and munitions that are eligible for expedited export, tech release, and contracting processes. Third, authorize and appropriate the funds and authorities necessary for the U.S., importantly in partnership with Taiwan, to construct and fill a regional contingency stockpile. Fourth, modernize states' outdated oversight policies and require annual reporting on Taiwan-related engagements that the Department of State disapproves. Fifth, strengthen AIT's staffing, facilities, and leadership, including by mandating Senate confirmation for the AIT Taipei director and immediate appointment of a Washington-based AIT chairperson. And lastly, continue to deepen congressional engagement with Taiwan's legislative yuan to support sustained defense budget growth and critical policy reforms. In short, deterrence in the Taiwan Strait is still achievable, but it requires even greater urgency and the full use and expansion of the authorities that Congress has already put in place. Ultimately, implementing TARA effectively protects American interests, American workers, and American lives, but more can and must be done. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Ms. Glazer, the floor is yours.
Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing. It is crucial that Americans have a deeper appreciation of why Taiwan is important to the United States. Robust public support for Taiwan can contribute to strengthening deterrence and to help make possible U.S. defense of Taiwan if deterrence fails. In my view, Taiwan's significance to the United States and the free world is threefold. First, as George W. Bush stated during his presidency, Taiwan is a beacon of democracy to Asia and the world. Taiwan serves as a powerful alternative to the Chinese Communist Party's led political system. Second, Taiwan manufactures over 60% of the world's total output of all semiconductors and more than 90% of the most advanced chips, which are essential for virtually all electronic devices, including computers, cars, smartphones, and military equipment. Third, failure to support Taiwan in the face of PRC coercion and aggression could prompt our allies to doubt the credibility and reliability of the United States' defense commitments to them. This is especially true for the Japanese, who worry that PRC occupation of Taiwan would put Tokyo's sea lanes at risk and hinder Japan's self-defense forces from defending the country's southwest islands. The threat of a full-scale PRC invasion or blockade or other actions are real, but not imminent or inevitable. Beijing's preferred strategy is to coerce Taiwan to agree to unification without resorting to overt kinetic warfare. The PRC seeks to achieve its goal by using gray zone tactics and psychological pressure to induce despair among Taiwan's people, erode their confidence in continued U.S. support for Taiwan's security, and make unification appear as the best choice. PRC experts and officials view Washington as currently prioritizing relations with Beijing over Taipei and exercising caution in policy toward Taiwan so as not to undermine prospects for reaching deals with the PRC. The PRC's deterrence calculus is shaped heavily by its assessment of Washington's support for Taiwan and its willingness to intervene to defend it. If Beijing concludes that U.S. support for Taiwan is waning, it is likely to adopt a more coercive risk-tolerant strategy across political, military, and gray zone domains. The Taiwan public's historically favorable view of the United States is declining, and doubts about American dependability to defend Taiwan if attacked are growing. Doubts in Taiwan about U.S. commitment to the island's security and willingness to defend it if attacked could result in despair about Taiwan's future, providing the PRC with an opportunity to advance its strategy of convincing Taiwan citizens that their best and perhaps only option is unification on Beijing's terms. Pessimism about U.S. willingness to support and defend Taiwan is likely to weaken resolve among the island's citizens to resist a takeover by the PRC and could embolden the PRC to undertake riskier actions to compel unification. In my written testimony, I've included many recommendations for the committee's consideration, and here I will highlight just a few. One, mandate the Department of State to counter the PRC's distortion of UN General Assembly Resolution 2758, which Beijing uses to embed its One China principle in the international community and block Taiwan's participation in UN-affiliated agencies. It is also using this resolution to prepare for a legal justification should it decide to take Taiwan by military force. Two, send more CODELs to Taiwan to ensure an up-to-date understanding of Taiwan's evolving security needs and domestic dynamics, which are changing, and to reaffirm U.S. commitment to Taiwan's democracy, prosperity, and security. Three, instruct the U.S. Trade Representative to finalize the U.S.-Taiwan Initiative on 21st Century Trade. And the Senate should also approve the Double Tax Relief Act to address the double taxation of cross-border investments. Fourth, explore ways for international partners to provide equipment to the United States that could then be passed along to Taiwan. This would be path-breaking. And finally, facilitate resilience and security cooperation between Taiwan and regional partners like Japan, Australia, and the Philippines, as well as with countries with extensive civil defense experience, such as Finland, Sweden, and Israel. So I thank the committee for its attention to this important issue and look forward to your questions.
Dr. Dorsey, we'd like to hear from you next, please.
Thank you, Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today on U.S.-Taiwan policy. In my remarks, I'll address four questions. First, why does Taiwan matter? Second, what is China's strategy towards Taiwan? Third, how is Taiwan responding? And fourth, how should we prepare? So first, why does Taiwan matter? I want to offer two main reasons. The first is, according to Bloomberg Economics, as we've heard, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would cost the global economy $10 trillion, 10% of global GDP, and that is an economic setback bigger than the global financial crisis, bigger than the COVID pandemic, and rivaling the Great Depression. That is because Taiwan makes the semiconductors upon which the world relies. But there's a second important risk, too. If we cannot or will not support Taiwan, then our allies and partners will assume in Asia that we won't support them either, and they will accommodate themselves to China's power. And if we lose them to China, we lose our best path to reindustrializing America. Our Asian allies still know how to build things, and they're investing in U.S. manufacturing projects from shipbuilding to battery plants under President Trump. But if Asia falls under Chinese hegemony, then all of that, those investments, those supply chains, and our economic future could become subject to China's veto. That leads to a second question. What is China's strategy? Beijing wants to seize Taiwan to end the Chinese Civil War, to secure President Xi's legacy, and for geopolitical advantage, and that strategy has two parts. The first is to break Taiwan's will. 4 years ago, China carried out 1,000 incursions into Taiwan's claimed air defense identification zone. This year it's approaching 4,000. 4 years ago, China rarely crossed the median line that divides the strait. This year it's crossed that median line over 1,000 times. And 4 years ago, China maintained a modest naval footprint around Taiwan. Now the island is routinely encircled by over a dozen military vessels. China is preparing for gray zone provocations, persistent operations inside Taiwan's 24 nautical mile zone, the seizure of outlying islands, and even a short-term quarantine of Taiwan itself. And in addition to that military pressure, as we've discussed, China is using cyber intrusions, lawfare, political warfare, international isolation, disinformation, economic coercion, and human espionage to weaken Taiwan's resolve. And if that doesn't work, they're preparing for war. They've undertaken the fastest military buildup in modern history, 65 ships added in 5 years, with a navy that will soon be 50% larger than ours. They're stockpiling commodities, producing missiles around the clock, hardening their financial system against us, building nuclear forces at breakneck speed, and infiltrating American critical infrastructure, all to deter or defeat us. That is a wartime footing. So how is Taiwan handling this threat? Taiwan has much to do, but it's not standing still either. They've doubled their defense spending in the last 10 years, and in the next year, they hope to go from 2.5% to more than 3% of GDP, possibly even 5% if you include supplemental spending. They've extended conscription from 4 months to 1 year. They're investing in asymmetric capabilities, anti-ship cruise missiles, unmanned systems, short-range air defense, and they're standing up new commands, like the Littoral Combat Command, to integrate those asymmetric capabilities. They've created a new National Cybersecurity Command, strengthened defenses against disinformation, and critically, they've launched a whole-of-society defense resilience program, including president-level participation in Taiwan. And a few days ago, that program distributed millions of handbooks, one to each household in Taiwan, on how to get them ready for an invasion or a blockade. Taiwan has much more to do, but it's moving, and with our support, it can move much faster. So fourth and finally, how do we respond? And I'll just offer a few recommendations from my written testimony. First, we need to balance deterrence and reassurance signaling. We should spend less energy on symbolic issues that provoke Beijing and more on the security assistance that deters it. Second, we need to bolster Taiwan's morale at a time of uncertainty. Concluding a long-sought Taiwan tax treaty will help, and so will congressional delegations at a time when executive branch travel is reduced. Third, we need to move faster on arms sales by putting Taiwan first in the FMS queue and working around production bottlenecks with appropriations for FMF, PDA, DPA, third-party procurement, and of course, pre-positioning on Taiwan itself. Fourth, we need regular interagency contingency planning for Taiwan scenarios, and Congress can require it. Fifth, we need legislation that creates broad and flexible authorities for sanctions, which for these scenarios we simply don't have. And sixth, we need to prepare for blockade and quarantine scenarios, including by providing maritime insurance to foreign vessels carrying energy to Taiwan when the market will not provide that insurance to anyone. Seventh, we need to work with allies on contingency planning, economic responses, and deterrence signaling. And all of those recommendations are just a start. There's much more that we can and should do. And if we do it, we can deter aggression and maintain peace and stability. I'd like to thank you for your time and the opportunity today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Well, thank you very much. We'll now thank you to each of you for your testimony. We're going to do a round of questions right now, and I'll start with myself, and then we'll go around. Ms. Glazer, I was interested in your comment that the trajectory of the Taiwanese view of the U.S. Commitment is on a downward turn, which is interesting since more and more we're engaging there. How do you explain that, or first of all, how is it measured, and then secondly, how do you explain that?
Thank you for that question, Senator Risch. It's an important one. As I cited in my testimony, this is measured by public opinion polls. There are many public opinion centers in Taiwan. They're not all reliable. I've tried to cite...
Kind of like America.
Yes, kind of like us. I've tried to cite different ones also from the opposition. But it's quite clear that this is the trend in Taiwan. Decline in confidence in whether the United States will come to Taiwan's defense. And I think there are several reasons. One, of course, is PRC narratives, disinformation, propaganda that is really quite prevalent in Taiwan. Secondly, there are some domestic narratives in Taiwan that also generate this sentiment that the United States is just simply not reliable. And then I think thirdly, if the people in Taiwan see, as Senator Shaheen noted, that the tariffs that were imposed on Taiwan, they're now at 20%. There's still no final agreement between the U.S. and Taiwan. Negotiations are still ongoing, but Japan and Korea have 15%, and so Taiwan feels that it's not being treated as a good partner, and they're worried about not being as competitive compared to companies in Japan and South Korea. And then, of course, there was the inability of their president to transit through New York. Ultimately, Taiwan canceled that transit, but he has not been able to come to the United States since then. So I think there's just a widespread sense of uncertainty in Taiwan, and every time that the United States president meets with Xi Jinping, with China's leader, Taiwan is very nervous, and there were all sorts of news reports how Taiwan its interests might be damaged in that meeting. It turns out so far that they were not, but I think that concern persists as there are plans for Xi Jinping to meet with President Trump several times next year.
Good explanation. I appreciate that. Dr. Dickey, I heard in your testimony your concern about the AIT, the American Institute in Taiwan. Could you we've dramatically increased some of the economic and security cooperation we have with Taiwan. So what are your thoughts about what needs to be done there?
Thank you, Senator. Also an important question. So as we've increased our security activities with Taiwan in particular, my understanding is we've reached max space constraints at AIT in Taiwan. There's simply not enough space to put people that need to be on the island to help execute current U.S. policy objectives in the security and other domains. I think it's well past time to direct state to do a review of the footprint at AIT and to consider whether a second or third facility needs to be added, an annex of sorts on the ground in Taiwan to allow for more people to be on the island.
Thank you. I appreciate those thoughts. Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to observe before I start my questions that I'm a little disappointed that we don't have more public here at this hearing and that we don't have more members at this hearing, because given that the conventional wisdom is that there is the potential for a war over Taiwan in the future, and given the economic implications of Taiwan for the United States, this is a topic that we all really ought to be concerned about and we ought to be paying attention to. So I especially appreciate our witnesses for your comments today, and I hope that we can share what we hear today with other members of the committee, because clearly there is a lot at stake and we better start paying more attention to what's going on. So I think this question is for you, Dr. Dashi. From March of 2022 to January of 25, the United States built a sanctions coalition that denied Russia critical technologies and billions in revenue for the war in Ukraine. I think we're going to need that same toolkit if we're going to deter China from acting against Taiwan and to respond if they cross the line. But as I understand, currently we don't have the authority, the United States doesn't have the authority to respond to PRC gray zone aggression with sanctions. So as Congress thinks about creating that authority, what triggers and measures would you recommend it include, and how should we coordinate with allies in the deployment of such tools?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Ranking Member Shaheen. Let me just begin by saying it's true. Right now, there are only a handful of executive orders under IEPA, essentially, that allow the United States to declare sanctions on China related to Xinjiang, Hong Kong, human rights, cyber, and other issues, but none related to Taiwan. And so as a direct result, in a gray zone contingency, especially a crisis, you'd have to create an authority. The executive branch would have to issue an executive order to be able to levy sanctions on a Chinese target. And so the targeting legislation that you've proposed is very helpful but we also need the authority to follow through. Congress could take the lead in making sure that that authority exists, as they've done in other cases, and that would be quite helpful, I think, to the executive branch. I think a second point to answer your question directly about priorities. There's going to be an escalation ladder that's needed. For different kinds of provocations in the Strait, we should have different kinds of responses. We may not wish to make those public. They may be internal, but that kind of targeting work needs to be done in advance, and we need to know now what the costs will be for the United States so we can mitigate them. That kind of work is just essential and common sense. And finally, I'd like to just add one other point about coordination with allies. Our allies will be reluctant to do some of this. They understand that there'll be economic costs for them as well. One thing that's going to be critical in getting them to work with us is to help them understand that when they speak out in favor of Taiwan, when they take these kinds of stands, we're with them. And that's why, as Chairman Risch, you mentioned earlier in your opening, the problem that we're facing with the punishment of Japan by China for statements by the Prime Minister is concerning. The United States has to stand with Japan, because if we don't, no other country will stand with Taiwan.
Well, thank you. I don't know if either of our other witnesses want to add anything with respect to sanctions. If not, let me follow up on the comments that the chairman mentioned about Japan, and just ask you, we haven't seen the administration voice support for Japan following Prime Minister Takaichi's comments that she made in support of Taiwan, where the Chinese basically threatened to behead the Prime Minister because of those comments. So, characterize, if you could, the Trump administration's coordination with our allies and partners on Taiwan and China policies.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Shaheen. I'd like to see more coordination. I think the Trump administration could coordinate even more intensely, particularly on Taiwan and even on economic matters as well, although that's a separate issue. In particular, right now, we might see China escalate beyond the rhetorical to the economic. And imagine if China starts taking economic steps against Japan. What we need is some kind of Article 5-like economic mechanism to collectively push back when China does that. We don't have that kind of mechanism right now. We tried to create it when I was in the Biden administration. We didn't succeed. But it is possible, and I think with congressional support, we could get there. So right now, I'd say there's been a few statements of support for Japan from the Trump administration, but we need a lot more given the scope of what Japan is facing. I will end with this. I did read a report, I have to verify it, that the Typhoon missile system might have been withdrawn from Japan around the same time that essentially China was pushing Japan. I think that's the wrong kind of signal, even if it's a regularly scheduled rotation.
Well, thank you for mentioning the report. I just happen to have a copy here, so hopefully people will take a look at it, because it does raise some troubling questions about our policies with respect to the ability to continue to compete with China. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Dr. Doshi, you mentioned in your statements just now military matters related to Taiwan. Capabilities, planning, and that sort of thing. It's appropriate to raise in this, but this committee is focused on other things. And I got to be careful what I say here. I'm on the Intelligence Committee. I'm a senior Republican on the Intelligence Committee, though not chairman, but senior. There's a lot more to that, and as you mentioned, it's not appropriate for public dissemination, and we hope it stays that way. But I just want the record to be clear that there's a lot more to this when it comes to the military preparedness and the military planning regarding Taiwan-China conflict. With that, that's about all I can say about it. So with that, Senator Ricketts.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today to talk about this. And I agree with Senator Shaheen. Really important issue that more Americans ought to be taking notice of for just the reasons that you all described with regard to the economic impacts to the United States and the quality of life here in a potential Taiwan contingency. Over the past several years, Taiwan has made real sacrifices to improve its self-defense. Dr. Doshi, you outlined some of those. Raising defense spending, restructuring its force, and investing in systems that make an invasion more costly to Beijing. But even as Taiwan steps up, the United States is failing to deliver key capabilities on the timeline deterrence requires. Bureaucratic backlogs and sluggish notifications are creating vulnerabilities we cannot afford. FMS cases get bogged down by bureaucratic delays, industrial base constraints, and outdated notification rules. Dr. Dickey, you highlighted this clearly in your testimony. With these delays don't just hurt the timelines, they weaken Taiwan's political will and ultimately increase the risks to U.S. forces and what they would face if deterrence fails. That's exactly why I introduced the Porcupine Act with Senator Coons. It would put Taiwan in the NATO Plus category to cut notification times and raise thresholds. We want to ensure weapons that we've already approved are available and actually reach Taiwan when they matter. Dr. Dickey, you made the point that the current FMS system erodes confidence inside Taiwan's political system. Can you walk us through how an erosion of confidence translates into real-world deterrence failings?
Thank you, Senator. It's an important issue and one that I care a lot about personally as well, too. So arms sales are a high visibility barometer of the U.S. commitment to Taiwan. And whenever there is a delay or notifications are bundled or held for political reasons, that barometer, that signal of U.S. support decreases significantly for all that we are doing with Taiwan and across the Taiwan Strait. Particularly today, we see a sharp drop in notifications year on year, both in terms of dollar amount and frequency. My concern is that sends a sign of our wavering commitment to Taiwan, even as we continue to use authorities like PDA and FMF to open up other forms of defense and security cooperation with Taiwan. My bottom line really is this. I think, FMS is but one piece of the toolkit that we have for Taiwan, and all of the pieces of legislation and resources we're reaching for to help accelerate and break down some of these pipelines and issues are important. But they can't be the only thing that we're doing. We need to continue to lean forward and use PDA to its fullest potential, use FMF, pursue defense sales that are direct commercial in nature and outside of the traditional procurement lanes, and really find all of the efficiencies available to us to ensure that these delays are not what's breaking down and that they're not seen as a sign of our wavering commitment to Taiwan.
Yeah. How does Beijing read these delays? And again, you mentioned some of the drop-offs in deliveries, and how does that shape their assessment of our resolve to support Taiwan?
Look, I think that Beijing has to plan for a Taiwan crisis based on what they can see as being delivered to Taiwan. And so when we are unable to deliver the systems that we publicly say Taiwan needs, these asymmetric capabilities, large numbers of small things that would help them counter the threat both day to day and in a crisis, I think Beijing could wake up and say, this is an easier fight than what we think it might be. They could wake up and say, today could be the day that we, Beijing, take action against Taiwan. And so when we're not able to deliver these systems on time and on budget due to challenges within the U.S. defense industrial base, I think that really credibly undermines that deterrence mirror that Beijing would otherwise be staring straight into.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you've seen some of these cases up close. Where in the FMS process does Taiwan lose the most time?
Frankly, it depends on the capability, and it also depends on the defense prime that is executing the case. So sometimes a defense prime can strategically say, we would like to move Taiwan to the front of the queue, and they will make changes in their production line to put Taiwan first above others. Sometimes the defense primes are unable to do that because they have other fiscal considerations. There's one specific example that comes to mind for a platform where Taiwan was further down the list. I believe it was number 3 or 4 or even 5. And the defense prime in this case was not able to move Taiwan forward because there would have been a significant amount of non-recurring engineering costs that would have had to transfer from another foreign partner to Taiwan to pay for the system that Taiwan had contracted for. These are all process issues, right? If the Department of Defense and State work together to figure out ways with Congress to reallocate funds and figure out how to pay for some of these costs, my view is that it is possible to consistently move Taiwan to the front of the queue on production lines.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Dickey. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. This is a critically important hearing. The security, the status of Taiwan, as all 3 of our witnesses have said this morning, is absolutely essential to our national security, to our economic security, to the 21st century. And whether or not we effectively deter the PRC from taking over Taiwan by force, whether through quarantine or invasion, is probably the most decisive issue this committee and this Senate will have to address. I'm the senior Democrat on defense appropriations. We are investing a huge amount in ensuring that we have the naval and the aviation and the space resources for a Taiwan contingency, yet we are missing several critical issues that you all just testified to. And I am concerned that this administration, rather than focusing and bearing down on the important and critical ways you've just suggested we could provide support for Taiwan, is taking its foot off the gas. I'm grateful for the chance to travel to Taiwan recently with Senator Ricketts and to introduce bipartisan legislation that would help address some of these key challenges around FMS that you've mentioned. The Senate has long played a central role in U.S.-Taiwan policy, back to the Taiwan Relations Act 50 years ago, and today with the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act signed into law by the last president. Our role today is all the more important because we have a partner in Taiwan that is stepping up in critical ways. As Senator Ricketts and I saw on our trip to the region and our visit to Taiwan, they are making dramatic investments that are significantly improving not just their defense budget, but what they're buying, what they're doing with it, and how they're delivering a whole-of-society resilience effort. It is baffling to me that despite strong bipartisan agreement that this is a critical security issue, that our president is stepping back. If we just look at a timeline of the major security cooperation announcements and congressional notifications concerning Taiwan that occurred from January 2023 to the president, this is FMS sales, FMS obligations, presidential drawdown authorities, very, very long and robust list. And then since President Trump came to office, virtually none. Ms. Glazer's testimony noted FMS sales to Taiwan in Trump's first term was a record $18 billion, but so far in this term, a tiny fraction, $300 million. On top of that, the Trump administration has canceled high-level defense dialogues, denied the president of Taiwan transit through the United States, undoing a long-standing precedent of presidents of both parties, all of this to curry favor with China in the midst of a flawed tariff fight. So from where I sit, the measure of our policy has to be the impact it has on our adversary, in this case, the PRC. Ms. Glazer, you're a recognized China expert, and you keep close tabs on the PRC's perceptions, on Xi's perceptions, the PLA's perceptions. How are they seeing all of this? How is this potentially emboldening Xi to make the decision that today's the day that he will take action, far more aggressive action and risky action against Taiwan?
Well, thank you, Senator Coons, for your remarks. And we met at the Aspen Security Forum and in the summer. And I remember you'd recently come back from Taiwan, and very much appreciate your attention to the issue. Taiwan is doing, of course, a great deal to bolster its own ability to defend the island. And I know we are working closely with Taiwan, but the PRC, I think, looks at Taiwan's capabilities and sees that it can use whatever means that it has to take Taiwan. It will probably try to do so in a way that before the United States can get there. And if they see this administration as diminishing its support for Taiwan, as I said in my testimony, they will probably be more willing to use coercion, to increase measures that it has, operate, for example, in the contiguous zone around Taiwan, maybe even fly aircraft in the territorial sea and airspace. And there may be more potential for miscalculation, that they may actually think that the United States will not respond, and they could impose a blockade and then see if there is no response, that then they will wait for Taiwan to surrender when it runs out of energy.
Thank you. Dr. Dickey, you mentioned that Tara provided the authority for the establishment of a regional contingency stockpile in Taiwan, but the executive branch has done nothing. Can you just briefly walk through the pros and cons of this concept, any unique circumstances in the case of Taiwan, given the tyranny of distance, why this might be an urgent priority?
Thanks, Senator Coons. And yes, I agree with you that it should remain an urgent priority. So there's two types of stockpiles that I think are really needed. TARA authorizes one that is on Taiwan, but we also need one or multiple elsewhere within the region for the U.S. and allies to use. You know, when I was in DoD, I departed last March. One of the challenges that we had was this policy question of who owns what and who builds what, right? And ensuring that for whatever stockpile was built, that the appropriations matched up with the authority. The challenge we had then was we lacked the military construction or O&M line item appropriations to build the stockpiles, but we also hadn't really reached the policy clarity we needed on who would own the keys. There was a lot of comparison to the Israel model at the time and discussion as to whether, you know, this should look like Israel or shouldn't look like Israel, the pros and cons of each. And as I understand it, a lot of those conversations, you know, never really reached their full fruition. So my belief is that this stockpile is feasible, but it needs to be done by and with and through Taiwan partners. And once it's built, as it's built, it should include not just sort of the hard material capabilities that the U.S. or Taiwan would need, but also the non-material things like medical supplies, food rations, water, et cetera, things that would really support the people of Taiwan in any crisis scenario.
Thank you, Senator Coons. Senator Curtis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. I agree with the Ranking Member. This is a very important hearing. I can't help but think about your comment about more members here, more public, and that there could be a day where if the worst thing happens, where this room will be very full, and we got to make sure that that doesn't happen. I'd like to bring up the 6 Assurances to Taiwan Act, legislation I've introduced that would formally codify the cornerstone, really, of America's Taiwan policy. The 6 Assurances were first articulated by President Ronald Reagan clear back in 1982. And just to clarify, one, the United States would not set a date to end arms sales to Taiwan, would not consult Beijing about those sales, would not play a mediation role, would not revise the Taiwan Relations Act, and would not alter our position on sovereignty, and would never pressure Taiwan to negotiate with the PRC. And really, for 4 decades, those principles have never really been formalized or codified by Congress, but have helped us shape our policy. And today, as the PRC escalates, as we have all talked about, I think it's really important. My bill simply would take what's been a longstanding U.S. policy, reaffirmed by the administration of both parties, and reaffirmed by Congress through non-binding resolutions numerous times, and codify it to ensure congressional buy-in and oversight. And I believe by codifying the 6 assurances, that we could send this one of the signals that we've all been talking about sending today. So, Ms. Glazer, as I mentioned, we've reaffirmed these repeatedly by the administration, but typically in resolution. However, my act is different because it puts it into law and builds a mechanism for congressional buy-in. So in your view, what's the value of formally codifying this, and how specifically might codifying the 6 Assurances Act in tandem with TARA help reduce some of the ambiguity?
Well, thank you, Senator Curtis. I think that it was important that the first Trump administration made public the 6 assurances. They had been kept secret for a very, very long time. Americans need to know what the 6 assurances are. We always say that our policy is composed of the Taiwan Relations Act and the 3 joint communiques with China and 6 assurances, but most people don't know what all these things are. So I think the legislation is of great value to the United States, and it, of course, would require the White House to notify Congress before taking any actions that are mentioned in the 6 assurances, and Congress would then have the opportunity to pass a joint resolution of disapproval that would stop the administration from acting. The Taiwan Relations Act has had legal force since day one, so giving the 6 assurances legal force could help to stabilize U.S. policy toward the Taiwan Strait at a time, I think, of heightened tension, and provide reassurance to Taiwan, which I have emphasized, I think, is extremely important, that Taiwan needs more reassurance, and the public reassurance in Taiwan will enable more public support for higher defense spending in Taiwan, which I think we know is all important. And it would signal, of course, that the U.S. is not weakening support for Taiwan.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the chairman's comments earlier about what you wrote in August about the declining view of Americans over there. And when I read your article, I couldn't help reflect on 1979 when we withdrew diplomatic relations from Taiwan. And I believe at the time Americans were in a really bad place. They actually hunkered down in their homes that lived in Taiwan because they didn't feel safe. And ironically, I landed on the island in August of 1979 for 2 years. And just within a couple of months, that was gone. Right, we were back to the status of being very special in Taiwan, and I worry that this time around is different because of things like social media and PRC's availability, right, to influence the people in Taiwan. So how do we counter that, right? And how do we not lose the battle in the hearts and minds of our Taiwanese friends?
Well, that's a terrific question, Senator. We were in Taiwan at the same time. So I arrived in Taiwan 3 weeks after we broke diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And I was there also it was about a year and a half, and a very interesting time. But I think the people of Taiwan remain very much favorably disposed, the sentiment towards Americans in general. I think they feel that they're not being given what they deserve, as they have been close friends of the United States. And so I think really to counter this sentiment that we need to be sending more congressional delegations. We certainly need to be approving and selling more arms. And as Lauren Dickey said earlier, this is really seen as a barometer of U.S. commitment. And of course, as Senator Rich said, there's so much we're doing with Taiwan in the military security area that we cannot make public and we should not make public. So the things that we actually can make public, we really should be doing more of, whether it's visits, even administration officials where necessary and connected to work we are doing with Taiwan, holding our bilateral dialogues with Taiwan, whether they're State Department dialogues or Defense Department dialogues or a special channel that we're not supposed to talk about. We have so much work that we do with Taiwan, and then passing the economic legislation that both Rush and I referred to earlier on double taxation, I think is really important in the 21st Century Trade Initiative, completing it.
I'm borrowing a little extra time if the chair would allow me just a
few
seconds. That era, that 1979 era, I think is very important for us to focus on because Taiwan was under martial law.
Yes.
Right. And to watch Taiwan go from martial law in 1979 to the democracy that they have today, I mean, that's exactly what we would like to duplicate around the world and thought we were duplicating in China, but it's gone the opposite direction. Finally, just before I yield, I'd like to also express support for Senator Ricketts' bill that would help with energy infrastructure. Really haven't had time to go down in the weeds in that, but it's a serious problem, and I think that's a great idea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
Thank you. And your comments about your bill and Senator Ricketts' bill, I think, are appropriate. The ranking member and I were just talking. Next business meeting we have, we'll give serious consideration to getting those on the docket. So thank you for that. Thank you for underscoring that. Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A year ago, about this time, I went to Taiwan. I was the first member of Congress to go following the election, and I can tell you the leaders were extremely nervous about the new administration, primarily in the context of up and down support for Ukraine and what message that might be sending to China about our commitment to Taiwan. It is incredibly important that we send a very strong and consistent message. Senator Curtis's bill, which I'm proud to be the Democratic lead on, we filed this morning. And so I appreciate, Ms. Glazer, your response. One of the issues that certainly was discussed a lot a year ago was the incredibly rapid transition in warfare technology, particularly the use of drones, and how this affects planning for asymmetric warfare that goes to the heart of what we sometimes call the porcupine strategy regarding Taiwan. And there were concerns that Taiwan is not moving fast enough in terms of adjusting their strategy to this changing technological warfare world, because there's still a lot of momentum behind big, expensive weapon systems versus very inexpensive mines and drones that can make aggression very difficult for the aggressor, as Ukraine has demonstrated. So I wanted to ask you, Dr. Dickey, given your Defense Department background, have we, in our relationship, adjusted quickly enough to understanding this changing dynamic? And is Taiwan adjusting quickly enough to maximize the advantages of drone and mine protection against sophisticated, expensive military weapons that, including ships and planes that China might use if they were to decide to take over Taiwan?
Thank you, Senator. That's a great question. So I think, yes, we have adapted quickly, but can we move faster? The answer to that is also going to be yes. I would offer that as a data point, Taiwan has, at least for drones, taken a similar model to when they stood up their semiconductor industry in the 80s. By this, I mean to suggest that they have really funneled a lot of their government resources and energy to building industrial parks across the island, specifically in the central west part, that allow them to funnel expertise and industry to building drones specifically. To my knowledge, they have not done something similar with mines, but in either case, it is a slower burn, longer lead time approach because it's using this industrial park model to bring companies into one facility, one finite fixed area to build capabilities that the military would use. The other challenge that Taiwan has, and that I think we frankly have as well too, is that they, under President Lai, have a demand to build supply chains that are red-free, i.e. free of Chinese inputs. And in this day and age, given legacy chips largely coming from the PRC, as well as a lot of electronic components, that's a really tall order, both for Taiwan and, frankly, for us as well, too. So I think while Taiwan is moving in the right direction, they've put a lot of policy energy and resourcing behind drones in particular. There's still a lot of challenges to getting there. On mines and undersea, for an effective defense, Taiwan will really need different types of mines, shallow water, deep water, and then sort of the water in between. And they're trying to move out and building and acquiring each of those different types of mines. For us, the challenge is the U.S. does not make the types of mines that Taiwan needs. So they need to look elsewhere for those resources. Taiwan is also, inspired by Ukraine and looking towards undersea UUVs that can move autonomously. I've seen some of those systems made by Taiwanese industry partners. They're really incredible, but the challenges that Taiwan faces, not unlike here in the United States, is that the defense procurement timeline is quite long. Yes.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I just wanted to save a few seconds to ask one second question. And actually, I have many questions, but I'll have to limit myself to one more. And this really, Ms. Glazer, I'm very concerned about the 2024 Beijing new guidelines that set out changes in the definition of separatism, including advocacy for Taiwan's self-governance. And those guidelines have harsh penalties, including a death sentence, and they appear intended to deter political speech in Taiwan. The foundation for this is the 2005 law, of which Article 8 states that if Taiwan succeeds from China, or if possibilities for peaceful reunification should be exhausted, then PRC shall employ non-peaceful means, ... So how do we assess the impact of their new guidelines as we ponder the challenge of helping defend democracy in Taiwan?
That's a very important question, Senator. The guidelines were obviously just put into place last year. They are still being implemented, and I think Taiwan is still studying and seeing the evidence of Beijing targeting their citizens. I would like to cite the recent example of a legislator from Taiwan, Puma Shun, who was one of the founders of Kuma Academy, which teaches classes on cybersecurity and how to help provide medical care in a crisis. It's really a very effective organization in Taiwan. And because of his founding of Kuma Academy, they have decided that he is a target, so that if in the future Puma Shun goes to any country that has an extradition treaty with China, he could be sent back to China. So this is just one example. There are many people in Taiwan who are being targeted by these guidelines. And I think that Taiwan is taking them quite seriously and working to protect its citizens, warning people who could be subjected to any kind of pressure, even imprisonment, not to go to China. But I expect that we will see many more examples of China pressuring people that they have labeled pro-independence. And this includes actions they have taken even before these were issued, the actions against businessmen in Taiwan who their companies gave some donations to the DPP. By the way, they also give them to the KMT because companies just support both sides in Taiwan, but nonetheless, they were targeted, they were fined.
Thank you.
Senator Cornyn.
I'd like to ask the witnesses, what would be the impact on the United States economy and national security if we failed to assist in the defense of Taiwan? Go for it.
I'm happy to start, sir. So great question. I think I'll let Rush talk about some of the other indicators in his testimony, but from a security perspective, sir, the loss of Taiwan as this, quote, unsinkable aircraft carrier would be completely irreversible. We would lose our ability to access the first island chain and the rest of the region. We would obviously lose a close, vibrant democratic partner. The list goes on and on and on.
Would President Xi stop there, in your opinion?
My belief is no.
Mr. Doshi, Dr. Doshi.
Sure. Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. I think it is the important question because the American people would suffer if we were not to stand with Taiwan in a scenario like that. Let me just offer 3 quick points. The first one, obviously, is the economic cost of war itself, which would be 10% of global GDP, a Great Depression, essentially, a second Great Depression. But there's another factor as well, because maybe they're able to take Taiwan without firing a shot. Maybe Taiwan capitulates. Even in that situation, we're seeing what we would see is an Asia that's no longer favorably inclined towards the United States. A world in which Asia is sort of no longer accessible to us. We're locked out of Asia, where Asian states bandwagon with China. And we have to assume that'll happen because right now China is half of all regional military spending and half of all Asian GDP. So they might just say, well, we'll work with China. We'll accommodate their power. That'd be a world in which the United States could not reindustrialize. We are correctly focused on building back manufacturing capabilities in this country. President Trump and President Biden focused on that. But Asian investment is critical. They still know how to make the things that we want to make. They may not be able to do so if that's subject to veto from China and if their supply chains are subject. So to bring it home to the average American, it's not just the cost of the war, it's also the question of what our business model will be as a country. Will we bring back manufacturing? And if we don't stand with Taiwan, I think it'll be very hard to do that.
If I could just add one additional point, and I agree with my fellow witnesses, using force has not been central in Chinese foreign policy, really since 1979 when they took some actions and invaded Vietnam. I believe that if they actually took Taiwan by force successfully, that consideration of use of force would become much more central in PRC foreign policy, whether we're talking about against Japan, South China Sea, against some of the claimants, or potentially against India. And as their capabilities continue to improve, much farther from their shores.
During the first Trump administration and then during the Biden administration, we worked on shoring up the supply chains of advanced semiconductors, recognizing the dominance of Asia in that production of these essential ingredients of everything with an off and on switch. What would be the impact on the U.S. economy, Dr. Doshi, if we were denied access to TSMC and maybe even Samsung's production capability in South Korea?
Well, thank you, Senator, and for your leadership on this issue in particular. Let me just say the impact would be catastrophic. The entire AI build-out in the United States is made in Taiwan. All the chips are from there. All the advanced nodes that we need for those data centers come from Taiwan. A world in which...
Is that where NVIDIA has their chips manufactured?
Yes, Senator, that's exactly right. Virtually every single NVIDIA chip of significance is made in Taiwan. And so there is no AI data center build-out. There is no AI industry without Taiwan's fabs. The result of China having not only destroyed those fabs in the case of war, but perhaps occupying those fabs if Taiwan is peacefully taken, it would mean that our entire AI future is in the hands of Beijing. And because AI is the most transformative technology we know of, and because we don't have the industrial advantage to go head-to-head against China, this is the one lead we do have, compute, AI chips. If we lost that, we would probably lose the 21st century.
If, in fact, the consequences of Chinese invasion of Taiwan would be so catastrophic to our economy and national security, does a policy of strategic ambiguity make sense, Ms. Dickey? And let's go down the line.
My belief is that the policy of strategic ambiguity still continues to serve the best interests of this country because it gives the President of the United States, regardless of administration, the most decisional flexibility in a crisis or a contingency.
Senator, I do believe that this policy of strategic ambiguity has one significant advantage, which is that it also incentivizes Taiwan to invest in its defense. And every pound of material that Taiwan builds or has deployed on its island is worth, 1,000 what we have across the horizon because it's harder for us to get there. So I'd like them to have skin in the game, and this makes sure that they do.
I believe that strategic ambiguity continues to serve American interests, that it is, there would be a risk of it being interpreted in Beijing if the United States said we would defend Taiwan under all circumstances, that it might actually provoke the attack that we're seeking to deter, especially if Beijing perceives that we really don't have the capability at present to defend Taiwan. I also agree with both of my fellow witnesses that we should not tie the hands of the president. But we have to ensure we have the capability, so we have to have the credible military threat. And I think that is one of the most important ingredients in order to support continued strategic ambiguity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for your testimony. And I hadn't planned to pursue this line of questioning, but just following up on what Senator Corden said, Dr. Doshi, one of the issues, of course, is making sure that we protect the high-end chips fabrication capability in Taiwan. But as you pointed out, that's part of a strategy to make sure that the United States and our AI tech remains at the cutting edge. And the other half of that coin is trying to make sure that we do what we can to make sure that China can't sort of outcompete us in this area. So we, of course, have the entities list that prohibits the transfer of very high-end chips to certain Chinese companies. But as you know, there are ways to get around that, including by shipping high-end chips to subsidiaries, right? Is that, you agree with the premise?
That's absolutely right, Senator.
And that loophole has not been closed, has it?
No, Senator, it has not.
And wasn't this a subject of conversation between, President Trump and President Xi in South Korea?
Yes, Senator. Initially, we closed the loophole, then we essentially reopened it.
Yeah, I think it's very problematic that we were on the way to closing that loophole, and now we've reopened it, essentially giving China a new benefit that we had planned to take away. Isn't that right?
That would be fair, Senator.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Glazer, let me thank you for all your work. And I had a question related to something you've written a lot about, which is the interpretation of UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 and how China has tried to misinterpret that to exclude Taiwan from many important international organizations. That's why, together with some of my colleagues here, Senator Curtis, I've introduced a bipartisan resolution that passed this committee. The full bill has passed the whole House. The final bill is pending, a vote on the Senate floor. Could you just talk briefly about why it's important that we make clear that Taiwan has an important role to play in these international organizations, that it serves our strategic interests, but also our practical benefits, and how China has twisted the meaning of that resolution to try to deny Taiwan's participation.
Well, thank you as well, Senator, for your work on this issue. I think it's extremely important. It is not receiving enough attention in the UN. There's obviously a lot of priorities that the United States has in the UN. And so this doesn't come up much, although it did come up earlier this year in the UN Security Council when one of our representatives raised the issue. China is pushing on an open door. It is telling the world that the One China principle should be embraced by everybody in the world, and that the UN has already decided that Taiwan is part of China. And of course, we have all read this resolution from 1971. It is 3 paragraphs. It talks about expelling the Chiang Kai-shek forces. So Republic of China isn't mentioned, but we all know that's Taiwan. And the interpretation of China is, of course, legally unsound, but it has written reams of reports telling the world that because of the fact that this resolution was passed, that Taiwan can never participate in the United Nations. And there are so many things we all know that Taiwan brings to the international community. Its wealth of experience in public health, to cite one example, and of course in technology. Taiwan is just a terrific partner that we work with around the world in international development in places like the Pacific and in Latin America, where Taiwan still has a small number of diplomatic allies. But in the United Nations, their citizens can't even walk through the door. High school students to even participate in a tour of the United Nations. I mean, the Chinese just have reacted to this so strongly, and there has been so little pushback. So I did include in my work that I've done on this issue things that the United States could do, and I do think that we should clarify our One China policy is very different from their One China principle, and we should have the State Department write a report that calls out the flaws in the legal arguments, because we have a terrific legal team at the State Department. They've written some really excellent reports on the South China Sea. We have never seen a report on this issue, and I would strongly recommend it.
Well, thank you for that, and I hope that the Senate, and I know the chairman and the ranking member would like to see this bill pass the Senate. I'd like to see it happen as soon as possible, along, by the way, with the double taxation treaty legislation that passed the House and is still stuck in the Senate. But let me thank all of you for your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an interesting comment you made about how important Taiwan is in the world for its size compared to China, and the spectacular things that they can do, even though they have a small population. One thing we don't talk about is it underscores again the difference between communism and a capitalist system. The capitalist system is magic when it comes to being able to perform for human beings, whereas the communist system does nothing but tamp down the performance of human nature, which is incredibly unfortunate. With that, Senator Shaheen, do you have?
Yes, I have a final question, and Senator Van Hollen's question serves as a nice segue into this question, because you were talking about China's influence in international bodies and what that does to undermine Taiwan. As you pointed out, it exerts its influence at the UN. And it tries to prevent Taiwan's meaningful participation and to force other countries to adopt that Taiwan policy. So can you expand a little bit on why it's important for the United Nations or the United States to counter Beijing's tactics at the United Nations, and also what happens if we disengage from international bodies? How does that give an opening to China to prevent Taiwan's meaningful participation, and also what that means in terms of our ability to compete with China in those international bodies? And so I would start with you, Ms. Glazer, but others please jump in.
Well, I do want to give an opportunity to my fellow witnesses to answer this question as well. I think that as we disengage from some of the international organizations, we cede just so much to the Chinese. They are able to insert their norms and their interpretations of what the UN particular should be doing to in individual agencies where in the past they've been very successful at getting people as the heads of agencies, and then they can further block Taiwan from participating. I will mention just like the UN Human Rights Commission, where there has been a reinterpretation of human rights. It is the Chinese believe that the economic rights are most important, not freedom of the press or assembly or speech. And that, I think, has been very damaging to democracy worldwide. So I think that this is likely to continue. The Chinese have become very influential in places like the World Bank and the IMF, and of course all of the UN agencies, the World Health Organization, Interpol, absolutely. These are places where not only is Taiwan barred from participating, but China is just setting the agenda, and it's very damaging to our interests.
Yes.
Thank you, Ranking Member Shaheen, for the question. I'll just offer a few quick points. The first one, as Ms. Glazer just mentioned, is that China can weaponize international institutions against Taiwan when Taiwan is not at the table and Taiwan is not supported. That does happen, and actually you mentioned Interpol. That is a place where that will happen. Right now, as Ms. Glazer mentioned, Puma Shun is sort of under target by the PRC. They are trying to push that through Interpol so that they can extraterritorially administer beyond who they have extradition treaties with a repressive regime against Taiwan citizens. A second point, though, which I think is bigger and more strategic, is that if we want to be the ability to deter PRC action against Taiwan, we can't do it alone. There is an international component to that. And so the steady erosion of the legitimacy of Taiwan as an entity that acts in the international system, maybe not as a country, but as an economy, that means fewer countries will stand with Taiwan when it counts. And that is the real reason the PRC pushes back on international space. It isn't purely about sovereignty. It's about geopolitics. And finally, Ranking Member Sheen, I want to put on your radar APEC. APEC is coming up. It'll be in China, and there's a real possibility that the delegation of Taiwan could be threatened or even arrested. APEC has every right to participate, or rather Taiwan has every right to participate in APEC. They're very careful and restrained. They don't usually send, for example, their president to APEC to avoid offense to China. And I think the possibility that China would push back on Taiwan's legitimate participation in APEC will be the most significant effort to constrain its international space that we will see in many years, and it's coming up this year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Shaheen. I just wanted to address your question about what happens when we disengage specifically. I think regardless of the forum or the venue, when we are not present, we're losing an opportunity to talk to other partners about Taiwan. We're losing an opportunity to talk to them about our One China policy, which admittedly is unique, but we have learned over the years since the TRA was passed how to operationalize our own unofficial relationship with Taiwan. And when we don't show up and we don't have the opportunities to talk with other partners about this, we're frankly missing out on a chance to educate them on the opportunities that they might have, to some of the earlier comments about allies and partners, to engage with Taiwan in a way that comports with their own laws and policies as well.
Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you. You've had interest in a little more discussion. Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We talked a little bit about this or touched upon this, but Taiwan's energy security is one of its biggest liabilities, and of course Beijing knows that. Tabletop exercise that Senator Coons and I hosted earlier this year simulated an energy quarantine and underscored this sobering reality. An energy squeeze doesn't require a blockade or even a shot fired. Targeted coercion alone could trigger a crisis long before the military action even happens. That's why strengthening Taiwan's resilience is central to deterrence. Senator Coons and I introduced the Taiwan Energy Security and Anti-Embargo Act to help counter this. This common sense legislation would expand U.S. LNG exports to Taiwan, support its energy infrastructure, and ensure adequate flows of energy shipments to Taiwan in a contingency. Dr. Doshi, you noted Taiwan's energy insecurity. What are some of the fastest steps both the U.S. and Taiwan can take right now to reduce that exposure to energy quarantine?
Well, thank you, Senator Ricketts, for your leadership on this issue with Senator Coons. I was grateful to participate in that tabletop with you, and I'm grateful for your legislation, which I think goes a long way to addressing this problem. There's one item I would add. It's perhaps beyond the scope of this committee, but I think it's important for us to consider, which is the question of insurance. There is a real risk that, of course, when there's a conflict or a crisis in the strait, even if there's not a shot fired, insurance rates will skyrocket for those LNG tankers carrying energy to Taiwan. We have a mechanism in the United States to address that problem because we thought about it over 100 years ago, in a sense. And that mechanism is, again, maritime insurance backstopped by the federal government, but it only applies to U.S. flagged vessels and U.S. carriers. We can, of course, modify the statute to allow that insurance to apply to foreign flagged vessels en route to Taiwan carrying LNG. And should we do that, we'd have a way of stabilizing the insurance market and ensuring energy keeps flowing. So that's a very simple fix that would have enormous impact right away. The other elements that matter are, of course, coordinating with Taiwan on finding other suppliers of energy, in addition to the United States, working with countries like Qatar that supply LNG to Taiwan to ensure consistent supply. And then finally, we have to help Taiwan find a way back to nuclear. I think it's important for Congress to push for that. I'm not sure that the decision to denuclearize was that wise. It has created this energy vulnerability in Taiwan, and it is possible to reverse it, as given all the innovation in our country in this area, including with small modular reactors.
Yeah, and on that last point, I agree with you 100% with regard to this is something that they should absolutely be taking up to get their nuclear power plant restarted again as they're in the process of shutting it down. That would help. And of course, our act contemplates as well the insurance issue as well. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Your testimony to this committee today has been clear that Taiwan, this small island of 23 million people in a robust democracy, is an engine of innovation and creativity, and that the competition for the 21st century centrally rests on the advanced semiconductors that drive artificial intelligence that are uniquely made on Taiwan. While in a bipartisan way, we have worked to invest in reshoring advanced semiconductor manufacturing in the United States, we're not there yet. And were the PRC to gain total control of Taiwan, the results for our national security and our economy would be catastrophic. So while on the defense side, we are investing massively in improving our ability to project force in the Western Pacific, on the State Department and the security policy side, we are, I think, failing to take advantage of a bill signed into law several years ago, as you've testified. Dr. Doshi, coming off the Trump-Xi summit last month, frankly, I was holding my breath, afraid that President Trump might give the PRC access to our most advanced AI chips, might grant concessions on Taiwan going against a long-standing bipartisan consensus, and given that there's likely 2 more summits in the near future, I'd be interested in your thoughts. You have supported U.S. PRC leader summits in the past. Walk us through what is a likely ask from Xi and what the consequences might be if President Trump continues this, I think, concerning slide towards prioritizing U.S. PRC relations over U.S.-Taiwan relations.
Well, thank you for the question, Senator Coons. I did have the great privilege of preparing several summits for President Biden, including his meeting with President Xi in Bali in 2022 and in Woodside, California in 2023, along with virtual meetings and phone calls. I will tell you one personal thing that I think you'll find interesting. In 2023, when we were preparing the summit for President Biden, we were focused on progress on AI with China, particularly a risk dialogue, military diplomacy, including at the theater level, and progress on fentanyl. Those are the 3 big priorities for us. At one point in the negotiations, China's side was very clear that to make progress on any of those 3, we had to change our Taiwan policy from do not support Taiwan independence to oppose Taiwan independence, the first major change in Taiwan policy in 40 years. We, of course, refused to have that linkage. We didn't think it was appropriate. If someone wants to consider a change like that, it should happen within the context of Taiwan policy itself. I suspect that they will continue to push on that.
Yes.
And one of the reasons that I don't think Taiwan was a big part of the summit most recently in Busan, South Korea, is because what would make President Xi quite happy is to have progress on that issue in Beijing. Every major adjustment that the U.S. has made with China to Taiwan policy has happened in Beijing, whether that was rapprochement, normalization, or, of course, the 3 no's from President Clinton. And they'd like to be able to complete that with a hat trick in April next year. So I think it's not wise for us to let Taiwan policy be linked to other issues. Actually, it's not wise for either side. It's not wise for China either, because it creates further risks for them too. And it creates instability for all of us. On the question, Senator, of chip controls, I am concerned about the possibility of us exporting our very best chips to China for one very simple reason. You look at the industrial competition between the U.S. and China, and they are 2 times our manufacturing, 2 times our power generation, 3 times our car production, 11 times our steel production, and 20 times our cement production. That's not taking into account all the other high-end advantages that they have. Our biggest singular advantage is simply that we are the leaders in AI compute. We've got that, they don't. And it is the reason we are ahead in AI right now. So to give up that lead at a time when we have other areas that we've got to fix seems to me to be premature, especially because AI can help us with reindustrialization.
Do you think we should legislatively adopt a ban on export to the PRC of chips above the H20 NVIDIA level?
I think one of the problems right now is that China has our number on rare earth minerals and magnets. And President Trump was a bit backed into a corner because if he wanted to push hard on that issue, we would reach for rare earth minerals and magnets again, and they could threaten a significant portion of our GDP. I personally favor the GAIN Act because I believe that it's important for us to prioritize the sales of our most advanced semiconductors to U.S. companies and maybe allies and partners before China. And let's be frank, there is a finite amount of this stuff that can be made in Taiwan's fabs. So any chip that doesn't go to the United States and goes instead to China is one fewer chip available to American AI companies.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, ask one last question. It seems to me from a recent bipartisan delegation trip to Australia and recent meetings with the Australian Prime Minister, we have right in front of us the possibility of U.S. partnership with Australia, with Canada, with Norway to secure these critical, in particular, germanium and gallium. Right. Why would we not accelerate our partnership to mine and develop those so that we take away this critical vulnerability to the PRC?
I would think that should be a top priority for the United States right now. This is one of the main leverage points used against us. It supports those minerals in total. The total value of the imports is less than the price of one F-35, and yet they support more than 20% of American GDP. So we need to find a way to fix it. There are all kinds of innovative technologies being developed in the United States too, including at the University of Texas, like new methods of filtration that don't involve chemicals. Here's the bottom line. If we did an Operation Warp Speed for critical minerals, we could solve this problem, and we just have to do it.
Senator, there's a lot going on critical minerals right now. It's bipartisan. It's between and by branch of government also. Everybody really understands this. It really hit home. I think starting with COVID, then obviously with Ukraine, and now when the Chinese use this in the trade negotiations, game over. It's time. It was time, and we can't talk about everything that's going on here, but I can tell you this is something that is right at the top of everybody's mind. And I think that the testimony that was given here is that the administration had very little choice when they were talking about the chips versus critical minerals. We don't want to be in that position, and we're going to be out of it here pretty quick. So, I don't know about pretty quick, but we're going to be out of this, and we will be well on our way out of it pretty quick. Senator Cornyn.
What should we make of President Xi's purging of senior military leadership in the PLA in terms of his confidence in his own military? Dr. Doshi.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. It's a great question. The single most important political question right now in China is very simple. What is the relationship between President Xi and his military? There is no more important political question in China than the relationship between the chairman of the party and the vice chairman of the Central Military Commission. Right now, we have an unusual situation where the vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, one of the two of them, He Weidong, was purged despite not being obviously corrupt and actually being quite competent. He was previously the head of the Eastern Theater Command focused on Taiwan. So his purge is a big deal, and President Xi personally elevated him and promoted him up 2 levels to become that vice chair position. In addition, the number 4 person of the PLA was purged Miao Hua, the top political commissar of the PLA, and then, of course, Li Shangfu and others, too. You look across the party, 10% of the Central Committee has been purged, 600,000 members were disciplined, actually 800,000 were disciplined last year. So here's the direct answer to your question, Senator. Is President Xi a Stalinist who purges because he's purging for the sake of it, to keep people in fear? Or is he purging to make his military more competent? We don't fully know the answer, but I do want to speculate for a moment about the second possibility. He's pushed out a lot of folks that he thinks are corrupt, that care much more about their personal enrichment and promotion than they do about China's national interest. And pushing them out is a way of making the PLA more effective, not today perhaps, but tomorrow. And so there is the possibility that over the short term, President Xi has taken decisions that will make the PLA less effective if they had to go to war in the next year or two. But in the next 5 years, it might make them more effective, especially if they can solve some of their corruption problems. Finally, Senator, I want to add one other possibility to your radar. I don't have high confidence in it, but we have to speculate. There's not great evidence of the party's relationship with the military at this moment. But the other person who matters in the PLA is Zhang Youxia, the top vice chairman of the PLA. He's the number 2. And there's some rumor that perhaps he and He Weidong had some disagreements, and that the purges that have resulted are a product of those internal disagreements within the PLA. We don't have high confidence in that view, but the very possibility that there could be internal, disagreement in the PLA is alarming and shocking. It also does not put China in a great position to act immediately on Taiwan.
Well, I think we can safely assume that the thing that concerns President Xi even more than Taiwan is maintaining power. And is that the right way to look at it?
I think that's absolutely right, Senator. President Xi thinks big picture about what he wants to accomplish in the world, but every day he's got to ask himself who has the guns and who has the security services. The PLA is the gun, and the security services is the knife in the party's terminology.
And finally,
It's not for half an hour.
Does President Xi and the Chinese Communist Party draw any conclusions about the U.S. resolve to come to the assistance of our allies around the world from what's happening in Ukraine, for example?
I think that Xi Jinping and the PLA have to consider the worst case. They have to plan for the United States intervening in Taiwan or coming to the aid of the rest of our partners. I think they likely are closely observing indicators that they have identified as to whether or not U.S. support for our allies is weakening. But from what has taken place so far, certainly if you look at our military exercises and our dialogues with leaders, our Secretary of Defense, who has gone out to visit the region many times and coordinated with our allies, made some pretty tough statements, for example, about PRC pressure on the Philippines, just to cite one instance. I doubt that the PLA and Xi Jinping at this point is likely to underestimate the U.S. commitment to its allies.
Senator, I would just add one point, which is that I do think what happens in Ukraine has profound implications for how PRC thinks about Taiwan. The PRC has a history going back over 30 years of studying foreign conflicts. They always ask themselves, what are the lessons from those conflicts? During the Falkland Islands War, when an Exocet missile from the Argentinians sank a British vessel, they thought, wow, we should have more missiles like that to go after the Americans. So everything happening in Ukraine, they are studying very closely. When they shot down one of our Nighthawks over former Yugoslavia, they immediately ran a report on that all the way up to the very highest levels, including the president of China. So they pay close attention to everything happening when there's military power demonstrated, and they're paying attention in Ukraine.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Thank you to our three witnesses. We do a number of these. I can't tell you that. I can tell you that the three of you have demonstrated why we hold these hearings, and certainly very high level of information that we've received, and we recognize it and we sincerely appreciate it. We're going to leave from members, we're going to leave the record open until close of business tomorrow. If they have other questions, they will get them on to you, and we'd ask you to promptly respond to those if you would be so kind as to do so. So again, with our sincere thanks, thank you very much. And with that, the committee is adjourned.